Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Goddess Life podcast, a podcast that aims to help you connect to your inner divine feminine essence and embrace that goddess within so you can align your mind, body, and spirit in both practical and magical ways, whether this be for your personal life or for your sacred business. I'm your host, Sharice Williams, a spiritual guide, and I thank you for joining me today. I was trying to not say, and I'm excited to have you here today because I always say I'm excited to have you here today. But I am, damn it, I'm always excited to have you here. So thank you for taking the time to join me today. All right, so tomorrow is Halloween, aka the best day of the year, if I do say so myself. Gosh, October has gone by so freaking fast, it's ridiculous. I don't know where the hell it went. It was like here and then now it's almost gone. But October is such a good month and Halloween is such a fun holiday. And I actually check back in previous podcast episodes. I did an episode last year all about the history of Halloween because it's a pretty cool history. There's a lot of stuff, like most of our holidays, honestly. There's a lot of history wrapped around some of the customs and why we do the things we do in these different holidays, and Halloween is no different. So one thing that comes up a lot with Halloween is the concept of death. Death and rebirth, and maybe not so much the rebirth aspect that's focused on during Halloween. It's a lot of the death aspect and elements of death. And this can be scary to some people. And I think that's why Halloween is kind of a spooky holiday for some people is, a lot of Halloween deals with the shadows and the darkness, and not necessarily the darkness like in an evil way, but just, those things and those thoughts and feelings that maybe we push down or things that we don't think about any other time of year. It's around this time of year, as the season is changing. And this is, of course, during the, in the Northern Hemisphere here. The trees the leaves are starting to die. Everything's starting to go within. But that can be scary for people. Not everybody likes to, face their fears. Not everybody likes to face the things that go bump in the night or the things that we've pushed down within ourselves. And this time of year sort of brings that to the surface. And that can be a little spooky for people. And this includes the concept of death. Death is a very kind of, at least here in like the modernized Western world, death has become this almost taboo topic. And it's kind of become this thing that like we just don't want to talk about, we don't want to think about. Let's just kind of so let's just put it in a box. But that's kind of bad terminology. Anyway, see, so you just got to kind of laugh about things. Sometimes we can't take ourselves too seriously. But we want to shove it in the corner. We don't necessarily want to think about death because it's not a pleasant thing. I don't know anybody that has had somebody die in their lives and they're like, woo, yay. Even if maybe you didn't care for the person in your life, like it's always a bummer when somebody dies. Even if it's somebody that you don't really know or somebody that you haven't connected with, it's always kind of a bummer to hear about somebody dying. It's always a little sad to hear about somebody dying. Even if it's somebody you don't like or you didn't like, maybe you didn't know them personally, but maybe like a celebrity or like a political figure or something that you didn't like and you hear about them dying, it's still an unpleasant thing to hear about. And I think a lot of that has to do with anytime we hear about death or talk about death, we can't help but think about our own mortality or the mortality of our loved ones. And that's something that a lot of people don't want to think about. And that's understandable. It's a sad thing to think about, but it's an important thing to think about. So today I kind of want to talk a little bit about death and dying and our mentality around it, and kind of how our connection to death used to be and how it kind of morphed. And then now we're also starting to see a little bit of a swing back to the other direction. So it's kind of like we started out I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, and we're going to talk about the importance of why it's important to think about death, why it's important to literally stare death in the face and confront it and be real with it. And, if it takes a holiday like Halloween to have you, have the courage or the inspiration to do that, then this is such a great time of year to start to look into the topic of death and dying and start looking into your relationship with the topic of death and dying. So let's get into a little bit about kind of like what death used to be like, and then kind of what it changed into, and kind of now where the direction we're starting to go into now. And I actually have, there's a couple death doulas and folks that are in like really like involved in the death industry, which that sounds kind of creepy, the death industry. But they're really prominent figures within the death and dying environment, and I want to have them as guests on the podcast. So I don't want to get too much into all of this because I want to save that for a future episode, but I'll touch on it a little bit. So, you know, years and years and years and years ago, especially before modern medicine and things like that, death was everywhere. You know, it was not uncommon to deal with death and to experience death on a personal, you know, face-to-face level. It was common, you know, it wasn't a common thing to go to the hospital and die in a hospital. Nursing homes weren't really a thing. You know, this was a time when our loved ones lived with us. I mean, we had our grandparents and our parents living in our homes with us. And so it wasn't uncommon for folks to die at home. And because of this, and because, you know, we didn't have the modern hospitals and funeral homes and things that we do now, it was up to the families to take care of their deceased loved ones. So it was commonplace for, you know, your loved one to die at home, and for the family, generally it was the women that that took over this role, kind of the midwife, the death midwife role, of caring for their loved one's body. So they would, you know, wash the body, they would change the clothes, they would lay the body out for display. And a lot of the time this was done right in the home. Again, they didn't transport the body after the person died. This was all done right in the home. A lot of the time the body would be laid out on like the dining table, and relatives and friends and family, you know, they'd be able to come to the home to mourn their lost loved one, to say their final farewells, to comfort the family. And this was all done at home. And then too, a lot of the time, once it came time to bury the body, it was buried on the land. You know, the family dug the plot, dug the hole to bury their loved ones. Occasionally, depending where you lived, maybe you would be then transported to a, you know, the cemetery within the town or what have you. But it was a very personal thing. Everybody had a very personal connection to their loved ones when they died. This was also, if you've seen like the Victorian post-mortem photos, which that's such an interesting topic. Some people think that's so morbid, but if you think about it, in the Victorian days, and the time when like cameras were first being produced, it was really, really expensive to get a portrait done. It wasn't like today where everybody just snaps pictures of anything all day long. It was really an investment. And so when they would take photos of their loved ones after they passed away, that was sort of their last chance to memorialize their loved one. It was sort of their last chance to have an image to keep forever of their loved one. So it really it wasn't morbid to take a photo of your deceased loved one. It was an act of love and an act of caring because you wanted to remember your loved one. And, you know, a lot of the time too, children were passing away. You know, it wasn't uncommon for children and babies to, you know, not really make it into adulthood. And so again, you know, they might not have had a chance to have their portrait taken before they passed away. So this was a chance for parents to have that image of their child to remember them. But eventually industrialization came around, and, you know, medical improvements came around. And slowly we started to see the transition of death and dying being something that we were in control of and that we had a relationship with. And it started to become something that was removed from the home and given to the funeral directors. That became a business, became a career. And so it kind of took that personal element away from us and, you know, kind of gave that responsibility to others. Around this time as well is when embalming became a thing. And this was around the Civil War. There's a lot of people have heard the story of Abraham Lincoln, he was on the train and they took him through all these different cities. And he was embalmed, and people were seeing the work of, what it looked like for someone to be embalmed for the first time. And they're like, holy crap, he died this long ago and look at how good he looks. And so that's kind of when embalming took off. It really became, it started out more, not so much as a cosmetic thing, but it started out more as a way for, people dying in the Civil War. They would die in one place, and by the time their body got transported to their family, in a different state, in a different location, their bodies had already started to decay and decompose. And so embalming was kind of a way to keep the body, quote unquote, fresh for the family to then be able to receive the body and do the funeral arrangements and mourn the person that way. So that's kind of how it started to take off. And then just from there, with the boom of medical improvements and hospitals and everything, death became this sort of like a sterile thing. And that's where we kind of start to get the rumors that like dead bodies are dangerous and dirty. Which if you don't follow her on YouTube, she's freaking amazing. Caitlin Doty. She is Ask a Mortician on YouTube. I am obsessed with her. I've read both of her books. I'm hoping she writes another one because I will gather that up and read it from cover to cover. She is amazing. She is a mortician, and she works in California, and she is sort of in the alternative death industry as far as, she promotes natural burials, but she's amazing. She has a wealth of knowledge. Definitely check her out. And she does it. She's so personable and down to earth, and she's kind of funny and quirky. So she takes these topics that can be really gut-wrenching and really sad topics, and she makes them, not so sad. She does a very good job with it. And again, she's very knowledgeable, very factual. So check her out, Ask a Mortician on YouTube. She's also the Order of the Good Death. You can check that website out and find her on Facebook also. But check her out. She's got all kinds of knowledge. Anyway, long story short, I'm going into more details than I wanted to because, again, I want to save this for an interview for the future. But so long story short, things happen, things change, societies change, and death became almost something that happens behind the curtain. Death is removed from us. We don't really see death. If we do see a dead body, it's after the body's been embalmed and makeup and, all these things done to the body to make it look like they're just sleeping, like a wax figure, just sleeping peacefully in the coffin, in the casket. And that's our view of a dead body, which that's so not a reality. The dead bodies that we see at funerals that we're probably used to seeing, that you're probably used to seeing, I know these are the dead bodies I was used to seeing. That's not what death really looks like. I guess you could say, yeah, that is one element of death. All deaths look different, but that's not, we lose that connection. And when I don't know what I'm trying to say. Okay. It's just, we're so removed from the process of death and dying. A lot of the time too, if we do have a loved one who's sick, they're taken to the hospital and they die in the hospital. We do have people who, prefer to die at home and have, hospice come and have in-home care. That is actually starting to become more and more popular. More and more people are wanting to die peacefully at home, surrounded by the things that they know and the things that make them comfortable and the loved ones that they have. So I'm getting kind of ahead of myself with that aspect. But when we have, so many people too, they can't even tell you what happens. Okay, so your loved one passed away. Say they passed away at the hospital, or even if they passed away at home, the coroner comes and picks up the body and then it's taken away. And then basically we don't see the body again until it's time for the funeral. And then we see them, they look like the lovely sleeping wax figure in the coffin. But it's still, there's just this kind of this wall in between the death process. We've become so scared of seeing the dying process, of seeing death, that we've removed ourselves from it. And I think that when we remove ourselves from actually seeing and experiencing death on that personal level, we don't have such a great chance to really have that closure. I had the honor of getting to see my grandfather after he passed away. I was 15. He died of colon cancer, and he died at home. I grew up, if you grew up in a Catholic family, you are no stranger to funerals. So all through my childhood, I wasn't a stranger to death. I knew about death, and I knew what it was. And I'd seen folks in the casket, but I had never seen an actual dead body. And I remember my stepdad took me to my grandparents' house. My mom was already there. And I remember walking into the house, and it was such a feeling of heaviness. I've never experienced that in my entire life. The expression, like you could cut the air with a knife, it was literally like that. I've never felt such a heavy feeling in my entire life. And I hope I never do again, honestly. And here's the thing too, none of this is easy. Death isn't easy. But I'm going to get into kind of the benefits of this. So I go upstairs, and my mom greets us in the hallway. And we start to walk towards the bedroom where my grandfather's body was. And I remember I stopped in my tracks because I'm like, oh my God, like I'm about to see a dead person. Like, what the heck? And I remember I was freaked out for a minute. And finally, like, my stepdad helped me gather myself, and we went in. And I remember seeing my grandfather, and it's not scary. I think we've become so like programmed almost to think of death as gross and scary. And granted, there are some deaths that are, a little less pleasant than others. But as a whole, it's really not scary, especially when it's somebody that you care about and you love, and you see them dead. It's not gross at all. It's really not. I walked in, and it was just, here's the body of my grandfather. And it was, I got a level of closure from this experience more than I've had with other experiences and other deaths that I've had in my life, and funerals I've been to. We were lucky enough to have most of my aunts and uncles come to the house while we were waiting for the coroner to get there. So my grandma, my grandpa's wife, was there, my aunts and uncles, a couple of my cousins were there. And I just remember we all sat on the bed. And again, like, people may hear this and think, oh my God, you guys did what? And that's because we've been so conditioned and so removed from the death process and the actual, reality of death, that this all sounds kind of weird to some people. But I remember we all sat around, and we were all in the bedroom sitting on the bed with my grandpa's body. And we all just kind of, had moments of silence. We actually had a couple laughs with some things, which it's okay to have laughter even when somebody has died. It's okay. I for sure know I want my loved ones to be able to laugh after I die. Of course there were tears, but we all had that moment of not only being able to be there for each other and support each other in a way that you don't get to have if you're removed from that death experience. But we all got to have kind of a moment of closure, a moment of getting to see our grandfather, or father for my aunts and uncles, getting to see him in this state of, wow, like, this is real. Like, he's really gone. And I think that it was, I can't speak for everybody there, but at least for me, this was such a profound moment in my life. And I'm about to get emotional. This was such a profound moment in my life. And the amount of love that at least I felt in that room, and the closure that I think we got to experience is something that is really missing within our society. Again, there's just that removal, because it's different when I saw my grandfather there in his natural state of, it wasn't beautiful. It's, here he is, he's no longer living. It wasn't a beautiful thing. It wasn't, oh, this is great. It was sad and it was hard. But seeing him in that state was so much more real than when we had the funeral and I was at the casket seeing him as that, made up, embalmed wax figure of my grandfather. it just wasn't the same. You know, I knew like, oh, here's my grandfather, and I was saying, you know, some prayers and goodbyes to him, but it was a completely different feeling and experience than getting to actually see him in that moment. And it's just something very special that I think people should get to experience. And then I've gotten to experience and be witness to the dying process for a couple other relatives of mine as well. And it was the same thing. There's just something so real about it and so pure, and so almost grounding as well. And I urge you, if you have the chance to sit with a loved one, as they're passing away, as they're going through that dying process, I urge you to do it. I urge you to read some books on the death and dying process, kind of what family members go through and what the actual dying person goes through, because it's really profound. And I think that when we acknowledge death and we embrace death and we look at death in the face, it's not morbid. You hear all the time like, oh, I don't want to think about death. That's morbid. It's disgusting. I don't, you know, whatever, all these different things. It's not. I personally, over this last year, I've really dove. I need to look up what the proper phrasing is for that. If you're watching this on YouTube, please comment below. Or if you're listening to this on the podcast, please send me a DM on Instagram, ShariceWilliams.xo. This year I've really dived into. This year I have dove into. This year I've delved. Anyway, I've grown my relationship with the death and dying process. I've like watched so many of Ask a Mortician's videos. I've read a lot of books. I've listened to other like podcast episodes and stuff. Really kind of immersing myself in the concept of death and dying. And it's not a morbid thing. It honestly has made me have more of a respect for life, a respect for my own life. It's had me appreciate my loved ones and those around me even more. I've made sure to tell people in my family more often that I love them and to give them hugs when I see them. It's the opposite. You would think by focusing and being aware of death and embracing death, that would kind of make you really depressed and, you know, hate life and life is miserable, but it really does the opposite. It really puts things into perspective and it really helps you appreciate life. And I think that is something that's really, really important for us to do, is to really, you know, we can't have that balance. Just as we honor births and get excited about births, and, you know, the birth of a baby has such a special place and it's not a taboo topic to talk about the birth of a baby. We need to have that kind of talk around and energy around death as well. I'm not saying we need to be excited about death, but it needs to be something that's as prevalent and talked about in our society as birth. You know, when a woman's pregnant, oh, we talk to the woman about being pregnant and, oh, what are your thoughts on being a mom and all these things. But then when we hear somebody's dying or has lost a loved one, it's almost this taboo thing like, oh, we can't talk about it. Don't talk about it. Why not? Talk about it. The person who's dying probably wants to talk about it. I mean, they've got a lot of emotions going on. It's kind of, not just the same. It's similar to a woman who's pregnant. She probably wants to talk about some of the stuff she's got going on, the feelings she's got going on, the physical feelings she has going on with this pregnancy and impending birth. The same with somebody who is actively dying. They probably, you know, have some stuff going on. And it needs to be talked about. And that is one thing I'm so happy for people like Caitlin, Ask a Mortician, and all these other amazing people that I've now found online because of looking more into the death and dying process and everything. For helping to bring this in more into the mainstream, which that sounds so funny, bringing death into the mainstream. I mean, death is as mainstream as you can get. We literally all are born and we all will die. But bringing this up in a way that is helping to make this not a taboo topic. We need to not feel weird for being curious about death. We need to not feel weird for wanting to talk about what's going to happen to our social media accounts when we die, you know, what's going to happen to our house and our pets and all these things. What do you want to have done to your body? It's important to think about these things before we die. I'm just happy to see that now more people it's starting to become less of a taboo topic again. And I think that that's really, really going to be good for everybody on an individual basis, and also as a society as a whole. I think it's just going to be really helpful. And that's all I kind of want to say. I'm not going to get too much into like the natural burial thing, because again, I want to save that for a future interview, and like the funeral industry and all of that. But just, it's okay. It's okay to think about death. It's okay to be curious about what happens when somebody's cremated. What exactly happens when somebody is embalmed? What is the process of doing the funeral makeup on the corpse? What is, what happens as the person's dying? What do people think and experience while they're going through the dying process? What about the loved ones who are there supporting the dying person? What goes on in their minds? What are some of the legal things that are involved with dying? It's okay to think about these things. It's okay to be curious about these things. It's okay to talk about these things. And what a perfect time of year to start doing that. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace and love, everybody. Bye.